Welcome into Cougar Tracks here on the KSL Sports YouTube and KSL NewsRadio, your legacy home of the Cougars. It's a Tuesday edition of Cougar Tracks, and I am your BYU insider, Mitch Harper. BYU basketball is back in action, and they are taking center stage at the Mecca, and that's where we start things off on today's show.
The top story of the day. The biggest story in the world of BYU sports right here on Cougar Tracks.
Number 10 BYU versus Clemson in the Jimmy V Classic at Madison Square Garden. Tip-off at 4:30 p.m. today. Pre-game begins at 3:30 on KSL NewsRadio. BYU enters this game ranked number 10 in the AP Top 25. They dropped one spot. But of note, though, they are in the most important AP Top 25 of the year. The Week 6 AP Top 25, the last 21 years, has produced a national champion within the top 12. Arizona's number 1, fellow Big 12 team. Michigan 2, Duke 3, Iowa State, who is on a tear. They're undefeated. They're at number 4. UConn, who BYU lost to in Boston, number 5. Purdue at 6. Another Big 12 team at Houston, number 7. 8 is Gonzaga. 9, Michigan State. 10, BYU. 11, Louisville. And 12, Alabama. Someone within that 12 teams is going to win the national title, at least history would say, over the last 20 years. And I think this poll does give you a bit of context because you've got the Feast Week games in the rearview mirror. You've seen all these teams play some pretty good competition, primarily in MTEs or neutral site floors. That's been the case for BYU. BYU has lived in NBA arenas really this whole entire season thus far. They've only had 2 games at the Marriott Center. They haven't had any true road games. It's all been neutral floors for the most part for BYU. But BYU, one of 12 teams in maybe the most important poll of the year. And this goes all the way back to 2003, 2004, when UConn cut down the nets in San Antonio, and it's consistently lived up to that stat where the top 12 teams within the Week 6 of the AP Top 25, someone emerges as the national champion. And it's crazy to think, too, that within the Big 12, there are 4 teams in that top 12, and BYU is the 4th best. The Big 12 is the best league in college basketball, no question about it. And BYU tonight going up against an ACC team. Remember a couple years ago, Clemson head coach Brad Brownell, he went on the attack of the Big 12 saying they game the system and that's why they get all these bids while the ACC gets disrespected. Well, BYU has a chance to show the strength of the Big 12 to Clemson, an ACC team who had a little bit of travel issues, it appeared, last night. They were going through a walkthrough in a hangar on their flight to New York City. They went through shoot-around today at MSG, as did BYU. But this is a good test for BYU going up against a Clemson team that's a top 25 Ken Pom squad. They're number 25, while BYU is number 9 in the Ken Pom ratings. I look at this game, though. BYU's got way more talent than Clemson. There's a lot of connections, though, to Clemson with BYU, at least familiarity when it comes to Clemson's roster this season. They've got former BYU signee Jake Wallin, who his father, Rick Wallin, played football at BYU, and obviously his brother-in-law, too, Harvey Longy, former BYU football standout. So Jake Wallin is a player to watch. He's been in the starting 5 for Clemson this season. I remember when he was coming out of Timpview, I was at his commitment day announcement. He was at this secret gym. Yoli Childs was there. And Yoli, I remember, was telling me this guy's going to be really good in college basketball. I think he kind of got slept on a bit. I really wish that he could have ended up at BYU, but he goes to Utah after serving a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Lithuania, goes to the University of Utah. Now he's at Clemson, and I think this Clemson team has a chance to be an NCAA tournament squad this year. So you got Wallin, who's got familiarity with BYU, being a Provo hometown kid, and then Carter Welling, former UVU center, WAC Defensive Player of the Year a season ago. He played AAU ball with Richie Saunders, and he was a high school teammate with Brody Kozlowski at Corner Canyon. He served a mission for the church. And then another player that's got maybe a little bit of familiarity with BYU, Nick Davidson, a transfer from Nevada. His late father, Kirk Davidson, who tragically passed away this past spring due to a heart attack, he was a former BYU basketball player under Roger Reed in the early 90s, so 89 to 90. Kirk Davidson, father to Nick Davidson, a Nevada transfer. He played at BYU back in the day. So some unique connections that you would never expect with Clemson basketball all the way out in South Carolina. This is the first regular season meeting between BYU and Clemson. Two prior meetings were in the NCAA tournament, once in 1990 in Connecticut. That was a heartbreaker, a last-second miss. I'm sure Mark Durant's going to talk about it tonight on the call because I believe he was on the alley-oop to Marty Haas and then couldn't make the basket. That was... BYU's backbreakers in the NCAA tournament. And then they lost two in Ogden with Danny Ainge. As Danny Ainge's junior year in 1980, they lost to Clemson as well. The 1990 game against Clemson featured Eldon Campbell, who passed away recently, earlier this month on December 1st. Clemson's honoring Eldon Campbell, who's the all-time leading scorer in Clemson basketball history. So all that to be said, that I think this is a really cool matchup. I think it's another good test for BYU in a grand stage of Madison Square Garden. AJ DeBonsa, there's been billboards of him in New York City from Nike. BYU was practicing at the Nike New York City headquarters with draft analysts on hand to watch practice as BYU prepares for a big game tonight, 4:30 tip on ESPN. Pre-game at 3:30. I really want to see AJ have a big game at MSG. You think about some of these star players in the NBA over the years, when they have a big game at the Mecca, it's just a huge story. This type of stage could make AJ an even bigger than life star than he already is. You know, if AJ goes off for 25, 30 points at the Mecca, man, college basketball will be buzzing. The basketball world in general would be buzzing about that. And look, AJ's not looking necessarily for that. He is a team-first guy. And I think that's been one of the really interesting things to watch with AJ this year. So I think everyone thinks, five-star guy, it's going to be about him. But he's really been all about the team. Sometimes I want to see him just take it over in these games. But he truly is a team-first guy. But it would be fun to see him just go off for a big game tonight inside the Mecca at MSG. BYU needs to impose its style of play on Clemson. You know, Clemson wants to slow it down a lot more. Do what Alabama did in Clemson's last outing out in Tuscaloosa in the ACC SEC Challenge. Get that thing up and down the floor. I don't think Clemson's defense is as good as maybe a couple years ago when they made a run to the Elite Eight. I think BYU's tempo can get this thing up and down the floor and just get it playing to their style of play, similar to the Wisconsin game. I think that would be the blueprint ideally for what you could do here against Clemson if you can impose your style of play. And look, Wisconsin likes to get up and down too, but much more than Clemson. But I still think if you can get to that style of play in this game, I think this will bode quite well for BYU. And I think you got to get off to a fast start as well. Get off to a fast start, which have been at times an issue. It was a strong start against Cal Baptist last Wednesday. Headband Keba Keita had a career-high 23 points. He was fantastic. He is outstanding around the rim and had a huge game with Headband Keita holding it down in the post. But he also got to take care of the glass, though, too. So get off to a fast start and clean up on the glass because Clemson, they are pretty good at rebound margin. They're 28th nationally, 9.8 rebound margin this season. And also, too, Clemson, one of the better teams nationally in assist to turnover ratio, 20th in college hoops at 1.81 in assist to turnover ratio. So they don't turn the ball over. So you got to value those possessions. And if they do impose their style of play, making it a half-court game, that could shrink the possessions and make this thing a little bit tighter than it needs to be. But I think BYU's the better team, and they've got the more talented roster in this one. I think BYU wins this game. They take care of business and get another quality resume win against a Clemson team that I think could be a bubble squad. I watched them a couple weeks back when they played Georgia and Cannon Catchings. They won the Charleston MTE. I was flying, I believe, from Cincinnati to Florida. I was watching that game on a Sunday. BYU football played Cincinnati, and I was flying out to Florida, spend the week to get ready for BYU basketball's MTE. And I was watching that game, and Cannon Catchings, former BYU player, was there for Georgia, and he didn't play much late, even in the overtime period, whereas guys like Jake Wallin were having a real impact on this Clemson team. And I'm curious to see, what type of impact they have. Clemson's got a team that's pretty balanced. There's not one go-to guy. BYU's got three go-to guys with AJ, with Rob Wright, with Richie Saunders. Clemson doesn't really have that. It's pretty balanced, evenly distributed on the scoring. RJ Godfrey, probably a point two, is maybe their top guy. True shooting percentage at 70% this season. He's averaging about 12 points per game. He boomeranged his way, started at Clemson, went to Georgia, then worked his way back to Clemson. 6'7", 240 pounds. But they have a lot of different guys that could be their top scorer. And this is a Clemson team, too, that for this program under Brad Brownell, very different operation in terms of roster construction, where it's a portal overhaul. Not much retention from last year. They did, however, retain their starting point guard in Dylan Hunter, who really kind of turned the corner last year when they had that big win at home against number 1 Duke. They stormed the floor. That was a big victory for Clemson last season. Dylan Hunter's their starting point guard. He's a pretty good player. So that'll be a good matchup between Rob Wright and Dylan Hunter, and one to watch. But I think Clemson's relatively had a light non-conference schedule. You look at the Ken Palm metrics, sub 200 in non-con rating, while BYU, top 20 schedule thus far. BYU's been much more battle-tested than Clemson. This is a big step up, I think, for the Tigers. But again, they're a really solid team. And I think BYU has got to play well and jump off to a fast start and impose its tempo. And I think this will be a good night for BYU at the Mecca at MSG. Tip-off again at 4:30. I'll have a post-game reaction show here on Cougar Tracks coming up a little bit later tonight. Let's take a break. Get to BYU football talk. What are the biggest needs for the Cougars in the transfer portal coming up in the 2026 cycle? We'll hit on that next here on Cougar Tracks.